The bullet that shattered the church window during Sunday service was meant for Miranda Barrett, though she had done nothing worse than tell the truth. She stood frozen at the altar where she had just finished her testimony in front of the congregation, watching dust motes dance in the beam of August sunlight pouring through the fresh hole in the stained glass, and understood with cold clarity that her integrity had become a death sentence in McGill, Nevada, in the summer of 1883. The men who owned the copper mines did not appreciate honest bookkeepers, especially when those bookkeepers were women who refused to falsify records to hide unsafe working conditions and stolen wages. Miranda had worked for the Consolidated Mining Company for 3 years, ever since her father died in a shaft collapse and left her orphaned at 20. She had kept her head down and her pen moving until she discovered that the accident that killed her father and 11 other men was no accident at all. The support beams had been logged as inspected and replaced when in truth they were rotten through, and the money allocated for safety had lined the pockets of the mine supervisors instead. She had gone to the sheriff first, trusting in the law and her meticulous documentation. Sheriff Hansen had listened with sympathetic eyes and promised to investigate, then reported everything directly to Clayton Morse, the mine owner. Within a day, rumors began to spread through McGill like poison through water. Miranda Barrett, the whispers said, had been keeping company with married men. Miranda Barrett had been caught stealing from the company. Miranda Barrett was a liar and a troublemaker who invented stories for attention. The good people of McGill, who had known her since she was a girl, who had watched her tend her dying mother with devotion and nurse her father through his final hours, began to cross the street rather than greet her. The boarding house where she rented a room asked her to leave. The general store refused her business. They used her spotless reputation, her well-known honesty and propriety as weapons against her. Every lie they told was measured against the person she had always been, and somehow the contrast made their fabrications more believable rather than less. How shocking that such a respectable young woman had fallen so far, people murmured. How tragic, how scandalous. Miranda had one final card to play. Reverend Samuel Whitmore was known as a man who could not be bought or intimidated, and when she brought him her evidence, he agreed to let her speak before the congregation. If she could tell her story to the whole town at once, show them the doctored ledgers beside her true accounting, perhaps truth might still matter. The bullet through the window was her answer. Miranda gathered her papers with shaking hands while chaos erupted around her. Women screamed, men shouted, children cried. Reverend Whitmore tried to restore order, but she barely heard him. She walked down the center aisle with her head high, even as people shrank away from her as though her mere presence might draw more gunfire. Outside the church, she stood blinking in the harsh Nevada sun, wondering where exactly she was supposed to go now. "Miss Barrett." The voice was deep and quiet, coming from her left. She turned to find a man leaning against the church's shadow side wall, his hat pulled low, but not low enough to hide the sharp angles of his face or the assessing intelligence in his gray eyes. He was tall and lean, built like a man who had spent his life on horseback, with the sun-weathered skin and calloused hands to prove it. He wore range clothes, a dust-covered duster over work-worn denim, and a faded blue shirt. A Colt revolver sat on his hip with the ease of long familiarity. "Do I know you?" Miranda asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name is Ryder Vaughn," he said. "I have been working as a hand at the Diamond J Ranch outside of town for the past 2 months. I heard about what you found in those ledgers." "Then you heard a pack of lies, according to most folks around here." "No, I heard about what you actually found, the truth." Ryder pushed off from the wall and moved toward her with the economical grace of a predator. "My brother died in that collapse with your father, Daniel Vaughn. He was trying to make enough money to buy his own place. Instead, he got buried under 1,000 tons of rock because Clayton Morse is too greedy to do right by his workers." Miranda felt something crack in her chest, a fissure in the dam she had been building against her own grief and fear. "I am so sorry. Not your fault. But it is Morse's, and he needs to answer for it." Ryder stopped a respectful distance away, but his eyes never left her face. Those papers you are carrying, those are copies of your evidence? Yes, not that it matters anymore. No one in this town will listen. Then we take it somewhere else, somewhere Morse does not own the sheriff and half the county. Ryder tilted his head toward the edge of town, where a paint horse stood waiting. I am riding to Carson City. Federal Territorial Office is there, and so is a marshal who actually gives a damn about the law. You want justice for your father, that is your best shot. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Because you stood up when everyone else sat down, because you told the truth when it would have been easier and safer to keep your mouth shut. Something flickered in his gray eyes, an old pain that he carried like a familiar weight. Because my brother deserves better than being forgotten in an unmarked grave while the man who killed him buys himself a mansion in San Francisco. Miranda looked back at the church, where people were starting to emerge, their faces ranging from frightened to hostile. She saw Mrs. Henderson, who had taught her to sew. She saw Thomas Garrett, who had courted her briefly the year before. She saw the baker, the school teacher, the postmaster. All people she had known her whole life. All people who now looked at her like she was something dangerous and unwelcome. If I ride out with you unmarried and unchaperoned, what little is left of my reputation will be completely destroyed, she said quietly. Seems to me it is already destroyed through no fault of your own. Ryder's voice was gentle, but matter-of-fact. Your honor is being used against you, Miss Barrett. Every good thing you ever did, every proper way you ever behaved is being twisted into a weapon. You played by their rules your whole life, and the moment you became inconvenient, they threw out the rule book and called you a liar and a whore. The crude word made her flinch, but she could not deny it. She had heard it whispered behind hands, seen it in the contemptuous looks from women who had once welcomed her into their homes. So what am I supposed to do? Stop caring about my honor? No. Ryder met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. You keep it. You hold on to it. But you let it be a shield that protects you, not a chain that holds you down. You already lost your place here the moment you chose truth over comfort. Only question now is whether you're going to keep fighting or let Morse win. Miranda thought about her father, about the way he had taught her to read and cipher when other men said education was wasted on girls. She thought about the 11 other families who had lost fathers, brothers, sons. She thought about the miners still working in those unsafe shafts, unaware that their lives were valued less than the copper they pulled from the earth. How far is Carson City? 3 days hard riding if we do not run into trouble. Ryder's mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile. But trouble has a way of finding people like us. People like us? People who cannot leave well enough alone when well enough means injustice. This time he did smile, and it transformed his severe face into something warmer, more alive. I have a spare horse. She is gentle and she will not give you any trouble. We can stop in Ruth to get you some traveling supplies. After that, we will stay off the main roads. Morse will have people looking for you once he realizes you are gone. Miranda gripped her papers tighter. The August sun beat down on her black Sunday dress, and she could feel sweat beginning to trickle down her spine. Carson City might as well be on the moon for all the experience she had traveling beyond McGill. She was a bookkeeper and a former shop girl, not some adventuress from a dime novel. The sensible thing would be to find some way to stay, to weather the storm, to hope that eventually people would realize the truth. But the sensible thing had never gotten justice for anyone. All right, she said, let's go. The ride to Ruth took an hour through country that shimmered with heat. Ryder had not been lying about the spare horse, a pretty little mare named Daisy who had an easy gait and a patient temperament. Miranda, who had not been on a horse since she was a girl, was grateful for both. Ryder rode slightly ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his posture relaxed but alert. They did not speak much during that first ride. Miranda was too busy processing the complete upheaval of her life and trying not to fall off her horse. Everything she owned was back in the boarding house that had evicted her. Everyone she knew was back in McGill, believing lies about her character. She was riding into the desert with a stranger whose only credential was a dead brother and a sense of justice that matched her own. It should have been terrifying. Somehow, perversely, it felt like the first free breath she had taken in weeks. Ruth was smaller than McGill, a rough mining camp that serviced the copper operations farther up in the mountains. Ryder took her to a trading post where he purchased saddlebags, a canteen, a bedroll, a simple riding skirt and shirtwaist to replace her impractical Sunday dress, and enough dried beef, hardtack, and coffee to see them through to Carson City. He paid with silver dollars from his own poke, waving off her protests. "You can pay me back when Morse is in federal custody and you get your job back," he said. "You seem very confident that will happen." "I am confident that we are going to do everything in our power to make it happen. The rest is up to God and the territorial governor." He handed her the bundle of new clothes. "There is a room in back where you can change. Take your time. I am going to check on the horses and see what news I can gather about whether Morse has put out word about you yet." Miranda changed quickly in the musty back room, swapping her heavy black dress for the practical split skirt and simple cotton shirtwaist. The clothes were too big, but not by much, and they would be infinitely more comfortable for days in the saddle. When she emerged, her Sunday dress folded under one arm, she found Ryder in conversation with the trader, a grizzled man with the sun-scorched face of someone who had spent 50 years in the Nevada desert. "That is her?" the trader asked, not bothering to lower his voice. "The one who went after Clayton Morse?" "I am the one who reported fraudulent accounting and criminal negligence," Miranda said, lifting her chin. "I am also standing right here and capable of speaking for myself." The trader let out a bark of laughter. "Got some spine on you, I will give you that. Word came down from McGill about an hour ago. Morse is offering $100 for information about your whereabouts. Says you stole company property and assaulted a mine supervisor." Miranda felt her face flush hot with anger. "That is a lie." "Course it is. Morse has not told the truth since the day he could profit from a lie." The trader spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "But $100 is a lot of money to folks around here. You watch your back, missy. Not everyone is as scrupulous as Ryder and me." "Appreciated, Cole," Ryder said. He handed the man a few extra coins. "We were never here. Never saw you in my life." Cole made the coins disappear. "But if anyone asks, I will tell them you were headed northwest toward Elko. That should buy you some time." They left Ruth behind and rode south into country that grew increasingly barren and beautiful. The mountains rose sharp and purple in the distance, and the desert stretched out in shades of tan and rust and gold. The silence was enormous, broken only by the creak of saddle leather, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Ryder led them off the trace of a road they had been following, and into a narrow canyon with walls of striated red rock. A thin stream trickled through the canyon floor, and a few scrubby cottonwoods provided blessed shade. "We will camp here tonight," Ryder said, swinging down from his paint with easy grace. "Water for the horses, cover from anyone passing on the road, and those rocks will still be warm once the sun goes down. It gets cold in the desert at night." Miranda dismounted more carefully, her legs trembling with fatigue. She had not realized how much strength it took to ride for hours. Every muscle in her body was making its displeasure known. Ryder noticed her grimace. "You did well for your first day. Tomorrow will be harder, but you will get used to it." "Will I live long enough to get used to it? That is the question." But she was smiling despite herself. There was something absurdly liberating about being a wanted woman. All the rules she had lived by, all the careful propriety, had been taken from her anyway. She might as well enjoy the freedom that came with having nothing left to lose. They set up camp with efficient coordination. Ryder tended the horses while Miranda gathered deadwood for a fire. He showed her how to build it properly, banking the flames against a rock so the light would not be visible from the road. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, they sat on opposite sides of the fire and ate a simple meal of hardtack and jerky washed down with bitter coffee. "Tell me about your brother," Miranda said after a while. The firelight played across Ryder's face, casting shadows that made him look older, sadder. What was he like? Ryder was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Daniel was the good one. Our parents died of fever when I was 16 and he was 12. I raised him as best I could, which was not saying much. I was wild back then, angry at the world, getting into fights and trouble in equal measure. Daniel was the opposite. Sweet-tempered, hard-working, always seeing the best in people. He sounds like a good man." He was. Too good for the life we had. I was working as a hired gun for a freight company when Daniel wrote me that he had gotten work in the mines at McGill, said he was saving every penny, that in a year or two he would have enough to buy a piece of land and start ranching. He wanted me to come in with him to finally have a home. Ryder's jaw tightened. I was on my way to meet him when I got word about the collapse. By the time I arrived, he was already buried. They would not even let me see his body. Said there was not enough left to see. Just gave me his personal effects in a canvas sack and told me it was God's will. "I am so sorry," Miranda said, and meant it with her whole heart. "My father died in that same collapse. He was a shift supervisor, one of the few good ones. He had been arguing with management for months about the conditions, writing letters to the company headquarters in San Francisco. I found his copies after he died. They never responded to a single one." "Did he know about the falsified inspections?" "I think he suspected, but he could not prove it. He did not have access to the accounting records the way I did." Miranda stared into the fire, remembering her father's growing frustration and fear in the weeks before his death. "He told me once that if anything happened to him, I should get out of mining country and go back east to live with my mother's sister. He knew it was not safe. But you stayed." "I stayed because someone needed to tell the truth, because those men deserved better than being forgotten." She looked up and met Ryder's eyes across the fire. "The same reason you came to McGill and started asking questions when everyone wanted to let it rest." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of kindred spirits bound by grief and the stubborn refusal to let injustice stand. Ryder nodded slowly. "Then we finish this. Together. We get your evidence to the federal marshal and we make sure Clayton Morse answers for what he did. And after that? After that, you get your life back." Miranda laughed, the sound bitter in the darkness. "What life? You said it yourself. My reputation is destroyed. Even if Morse is arrested, even if everything I said is proven true, McGill will never accept me again. I will always be the woman who rode off alone with a man who caused trouble, who did not know her place. Then you go somewhere new, somewhere that does not know your history and does not care about it. The West is full of fresh starts for people brave enough to take them." Ryder's voice was quiet but certain. "You are smart, Miss Barrett. You have skills that any business would value. You do not have to go back to people who used your honor against you." "And what about you? What will you do once this is finished?" "Keep drifting, I suppose." "That is what I do." But he did not sound certain, and something in his expression made Miranda think that maybe, just maybe, he was as tired of drifting as she was of being controlled by other people's opinions. They sat in companionable silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Ryder finally banked it for the night and rolled out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dead fire, Miranda lay staring up at the impossible sprawl of stars overhead and wondered what it meant that she felt safer here in the desert with a virtual stranger than she had felt in McGill surrounded by people she had known all her life. The answer, she suspected, was that Ryder Vaughn had not asked her to be anything other than what she was. He had not demanded propriety or deference or feminine softness. He had simply offered her a choice and respected her enough to let her make it. It was a novel feeling. She thought she could get used to it. The second day was harder, just as Ryder had predicted. They rode through country that seemed designed to kill the unwary, all scorching sun and alkali dust, and rattlesnakes coiled in the shade of rocks. Miranda's muscles screamed in protest with every step Daisy took, and the sun beat down mercilessly despite the wide-brimmed hat Ryder had insisted she wear. But there was a rhythm to it, she found. The sway of the horse, the endless horizon, the knowledge that every mile carried her farther from the lies and closer to the truth. Ryder proved to be good company during the long ride. He pointed out landmarks and wildlife, told stories about his years working freight routes and cattle drives, and asked her questions about bookkeeping and business that suggested a sharp intelligence hidden beneath his rough exterior. "Did you always want to work with numbers?" he asked as they followed a dry wash through a forest of Joshua trees. "I always liked the way they made sense," Miranda admitted. "People lie, people change their minds, people say one thing and mean another, but numbers are honest. 2 plus 2 is always 4. A ledger either balances or it does not. Except when someone is cooking the books. Even then, the dishonesty shows if you know where to look. There is always a trail. False accounts leave traces like a snake moving through sand." She patted the saddlebag where her evidence rested. "That is how I caught them. The numbers they reported to the Territorial Mining Commission did not match the numbers in their internal accounting. Someone was sloppy. Lucky for us. Unlucky for Morse." Ryder glanced back at her, his gray eyes assessing. "You have a gift for this, you know. That kind of attention to detail, that ability to see patterns. Most people would have missed what you caught." Miranda felt a warm flush of pleasure at the compliment. No one in McGill had ever praised her skills, not really. Her work was accepted as adequate but nothing special, certainly nothing to take pride in. Women did not have gifts, they had accomplishments. And those accomplishments were always measured against their success at being decorative, pleasant, and marriageable. "Thank you," she said. "That means something coming from you." "Why would it mean more from me than anyone else?" "Because you are not trying to flatter me or manage me or make me into something I am not. You are just telling the truth." She urged Daisy forward until she rode alongside Ryder instead of behind him. "I am not used to that. People in McGill always had an agenda. They wanted me to marry someone or join some committee or behave in a way that reflected well on them. Even the people who meant well treated me like a project to be managed, not a person with my own thoughts." Sounds suffocating. It was. I did not realize how much until now. Miranda looked out at the vast empty desert, at the mountains shimmering in the heat haze, at the endless sky. "Out here I can breathe." Ryder smiled, and it was the same transformation she had noticed before. Warmth breaking through the severe lines of his face like sun through clouds. "I know that feeling. That is why I have stayed on the move all these years. Cities make me feel caged. Too many rules, too many people telling you how to think and what to do. Out here you can be who you actually are instead of who they want you to be." They rode in comfortable silence after that, and Miranda found herself watching Ryder from the corner of her eye. He sat his horse with unconscious grace, every movement economical and sure. His hands on the reins were gentle despite their obvious strength, and he spoke to his paint in low tones, treating the animal like a partner rather than a tool. There was a quietness about him, a self-possession that came from someone who had spent a lot of time alone and made peace with himself. She realized with a start that she found him attractive. Not in the way she had found Thomas Garrett attractive, with his clean-cut good looks and careful manners. Ryder was rougher, harder, marked by a life she could barely imagine. But there was integrity in him, a core of decency that showed in the way he had helped her without asking for anything in return, the way he treated her as an equal instead of a burden or a prize. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like one more freedom, one more rule discarded. She was allowed to find him attractive. She was allowed to notice the breadth of his shoulders and the line of his jaw. She was allowed to wonder what it would be like if he looked at her with something more than respectful distance in his gray eyes. The thought kept her warm even as the sun began to set and the desert cold crept in. They made camp that night in the ruins of an old way station, its adobe walls crumbling but still solid enough to provide shelter and concealment. Ryder shot a jackrabbit, and they roasted it over the fire, a welcome change from hardtack and jerky. The meat was tough and gamey, but Miranda ate with enthusiasm, surprised by her own hunger. "You are adapting," Ryder observed, watching her tear into a rabbit leg with none of her former delicacy. "I am starving," Miranda corrected. "There is a difference." "No, you are adapting. First day you looked like you were going to fall off your horse every mile. Today you rode like you were born to it. Tonight you are eating camp food without complaint. Tomorrow you will probably be roping steers and cursing like a mule skinner." Miranda threw a small stone at him, laughing. "I will do no such thing. I am still a lady even if I am a wanted criminal." "You are not a criminal. Morse is the criminal." Ryder's humor faded into something more serious. "Do not let his lies get into your head, Miranda. You did the right thing, the brave thing. The fact that people punished you for it says everything about them and nothing about you." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "You can call me Miranda," she said quietly. "If we are going to be traveling partners, we might as well dispense with the formality." "Miranda." He said it like he was tasting the word, testing its shape. "It suits you. Strong but beautiful." Their eyes met across the fire, and Miranda felt heat that had nothing to do with the flames. Ryder looked away first, his jaw tightening as though he was wrestling with something internal. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "We have another long day tomorrow, and we are getting into country where we need to be more careful. The main road to Carson City runs through Middlegate, and that is where Morse's people will be watching if they have any sense." Miranda wanted to protest, wanted to ask what he had been about to say or do before he retreated behind professional distance. But she was learning the rhythms of Ryder Vaughn, the way he pulled back whenever things got too personal, too close. He was a man with walls, and she suspected those walls had been built over many lonely years. She could be patient. She had time. The third day brought trouble just as Ryder had predicted. They had been following a route that skirted south of the main road, using dry washes and game trails to stay out of sight. But water was scarce in this part of the desert, and eventually they had no choice but to approach a known spring that sat at the junction of two freight routes. Ryder spotted the riders before Miranda did, his body going tense in the saddle. "3 men at the spring," he said quietly. "Could be honest travelers, could be Morse's people. Either way, we need water, so we are going to have to risk it. Let me do the talking. If things go bad, you ride north as hard as you can and do not look back. I am not leaving you to face trouble alone. Yes, you are, because you are the one with the evidence. If something happens to me, you still have to get those papers to Carson City." His voice was hard now, brooking no argument. "Promise me, Miranda. If I tell you to run, you run." She wanted to refuse, wanted to insist that they were partners in this, but the grim set of his jaw told her this was not negotiable. "I promise," she said, hating the words even as she spoke them. They approached the spring slowly, their hands visible and away from their weapons. The 3 men waiting there watched them come with the flat, assessing stares of predators. They were rough types, armed with rifles and revolvers, their clothes coated in trail dust. The tallest one, a man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw, stood as they approached. "Afternoon," Ryder said calmly. "We are hoping to water our horses if you're willing to share the spring. Spring is free to anyone who wants to use it, Schwaraimet," Scarface said. His eyes moved to Miranda, and she saw recognition flare. "You would not happen to be Miranda Barrett, would you? Lady bookkeeper from McGill?" Miranda's heart lurched, but Ryder answered before she could. "Name is Vaughn. This is my wife, Mary. We are headed to Carson City to visit her sister." Your wife. Scarface smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Funny thing. Clayton Morse sent word he is looking for a woman named Miranda Barrett. Says she is traveling with a man who might be going by the name Vaughn. Says there is $100 in it for anyone who brings her back to McGill. Then you had better keep your eyes open, Ryder said. His voice remained calm, but Miranda could see the tension coiling through him like a spring being wound tighter and tighter. We have not seen anyone matching that description. I think you are lying. Scarface took a step forward. I think you are Ryder Vaughn, and that is Miranda Barrett, and I think we are going to collect that $100. I think you are going to step back and let us water our horses in peace, Ryder said. His hand drifted toward his Colt, the movement so casual it barely seemed intentional. We do not want trouble. Too bad. Trouble found you anyway. Everything happened very fast after that. Scarface went for his gun. Ryder was faster, his Colt clearing leather in a blur of motion. The shot cracked across the desert like thunder, and Scarface went down with a scream, clutching his shoulder. The other two men scrambled backward, their hands rising in surrender. Next one goes in the heart instead of the shoulder, Ryder said, his voice cold as winter. His gun never wavered. You boys need to think real careful about whether $100 is worth dying for. We do not want trouble, one of them said, his voice shaking. Take the water. Take whatever you want. Just do not shoot. Smart. Ryder gestured with his gun. Empty your weapons on the ground, slow and easy. They complied, fumbling their revolvers and rifles onto the dirt. Ryder waited until they had stepped well back, then dismounted in one fluid motion. He kept his gun trained on them while he gathered their weapons and tossed them into the spring. That was expensive, one of the men protested. Should have thought of that before you decided bounty hunting was a good idea. Ryder filled their canteens from the spring, his movements quick and efficient, never taking his eyes off the three men for more than a second. Miranda, water the horses. She dismounted on trembling legs and led Daisy and the paint to the spring. The horses drank deeply while she tried to control her racing heartbeat. She had never seen anyone shot before. Scarface was still writhing on the ground, moaning and cursing, his blood darkening the dust. You cannot just leave him like that, she said. He needs medical attention. He was going to kidnap you and collect blood money from the man who killed our family, Ryder said flatly. He can ride to the nearest town same as anyone. I already did him a kindness by not killing him. When the horses had drunk their fill, Ryder backed toward them, his gun still trained on the three men. You're going to wait here for half an hour before you move. I have got a rifle and a long sight, and I will be watching from up in those rocks. If I see you coming after us, I will not aim for the shoulder next time. Understood? They nodded frantically. Ryder holstered his Colt finally and swung back into his saddle. Let's ride. They pushed the horses hard, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the spring. Miranda's mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Ryder had shot a man. He had done it without hesitation, without apparent remorse, and then threatened to kill the others. It was a side of him she had not seen before, a hardness that came from a life she could barely imagine. They rode until the sun was setting, and they reached a narrow defile between two massive rock formations. Only then did Ryder slow, his shoulders gradually relaxing from their rigid tension. Are you all right? He asked, glancing back at her. You shot him. I did. He was going to shoot me first, and then he was going to drag you back to Morse. I did what I had to do. Ryder's voice was matter-of-fact, but she could see the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands gripped the reins a little too hard. I'm sorry you had to see that. I know it was not pleasant. Is he going to die? Probably not. It was a clean shot through the shoulder, nothing vital hit. He will hurt like hell for a while, but he will live. Ryder dismounted and began setting up camp with the efficiency of long practice. I could have killed him. Part of me wanted to for what he was going to do to you, but I am not a murderer, Miranda. I do not kill unless I have no other choice. Miranda climbed down from Daisy, her legs shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. I know. I know you did what you had to. It is just a lot to take in. You are holding up better than most would. Ryder started a fire, his hands steady despite everything. Most women would be having hysterics right now. Most women have not had their entire lives destroyed in the span of a month, Miranda said dryly. My capacity for shock has been somewhat exhausted. That surprised a laugh out of him, genuine and warm. Fair point. You're tougher than you look, Miranda Barrett. I am tougher than I thought I was, she admitted. She sat down by the fire, hugging her knees to her chest. Back in McGill, I thought I knew what I was capable of. I thought I was brave because I spoke up and told the truth. But that was easy compared to this. This is real danger, real violence. And somehow I am still here, still going forward. That is what real bravery looks like. Ryder sat across from her, his gray eyes serious. Anyone can be brave when the cost is low. It takes real courage to keep going when you are frightened, when you have seen how bad things can get, when you know the risks. You have that kind of courage, Miranda. Do not doubt it. Something in his voice made her look up, made her really see him. He was not just talking about her, she realized. He was talking about himself, about the choices he had made and the life he had lived. He carried his own scars, his own losses, his own fears, and he kept going anyway, kept doing what he thought was right, even when it cost him. Thank you, she said softly, for protecting me today, for not killing that man when you could have, for treating me like I am strong enough to handle the truth. You are welcome. Ryder held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, some emotion quickly suppressed. Then he looked away, busying himself with preparing their simple dinner. We are close now. One more day, and we will reach Carson City. Once we get your evidence to the federal marshal, you will be safe. Morse will not be able to touch you. And then what happens to us? The words were out before Miranda could stop them, too revealing, too honest. Ryder went very still. What do you want to happen? I do not know. A week ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life was supposed to look like. I was going to keep working, keep saving money, maybe marry someone appropriate and settle down in McGill. It was not exciting, but it was safe and predictable and what everyone expected. Miranda wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. Now I do not have any of that. My future is completely blank. And the strange thing is, I am not sorry. Even with everything that has happened, I am not sorry. Because you are free, Ryder said quietly. You do not owe anyone anything anymore. You do not have to live by their rules or meet their expectations. You get to decide what comes next. What if I decide I want to keep traveling, see more of the country, go places I have only read about in books? Then you do that. What if I decide I do not want to be alone while I do it? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Ryder looked at her across the fire, and she saw conflict in his face, desire warring with restraint. Miranda, I am not the kind of man you should tie yourself to. I've been drifting for years. I do not have a home, do not have prospects. I have lived hard and I have done things I am not proud of. You deserve better than a saddle tramp with nothing to offer but a horse and a fast gun. What if I do not want better? What if I want real? Miranda stood and moved around the fire, driven by an impulse she did not fully understand. She knelt in front of Ryder, close enough to see the silver threaded through his dark hair, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar on his chin. You have treated me with more respect and honesty in 3 days than most men in McGill showed me in 3 years. You risked your life to help me get justice for my father and your brother. You see me as a person, not a problem or a possession. That is not nothing, Ryder. That is everything. You are not thinking clearly. You have been through trauma. You are exhausted and frightened. Once this is over and you have time to breathe, you will realize you do not want to spend your life with someone like me. But his voice was rough, almost desperate, and he did not pull away when she reached up to touch his face. "Stop telling me what I want," Miranda said firmly. "Stop deciding for me what I need or deserve. My honor was used against me by people who wanted to control me. Do not do the same thing by trying to protect me from my own choices." She held his gaze, letting him see the certainty in her eyes. "I know what I am saying. I know it is fast and crazy and not at all proper, and I do not care, because for the first time in my life, I am making a choice based on what I actually want instead of what everyone says I should want." Ryder closed his eyes, and she could feel him trembling beneath her touch. "What do you want, Miranda?" "You," she whispered, "if you will have me." He opened his eyes, and the naked emotion in them took her breath away. Then he was kissing her, one hand cupping the back of her head, the other pulling her close. It was not a gentle kiss or a tentative one. It was the kiss of a man who had been holding himself back with iron control and had finally let himself feel. Miranda kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his. She had been kissed before, chased pecks from suitors who treated her like porcelain that might break. This was nothing like that. This was heat and hunger and honesty. Two people who had been alone too long, finding each other in the darkness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder pressed his forehead to hers. "I cannot promise you anything fancy," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not have money or property or a fine reputation. All I can give you is honesty and protection in everything I am." "That is all I want," Miranda said. She was crying, she realized, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. "That is more than I ever hoped for." They held each other as the fire burned down and the stars wheeled overhead, and Miranda felt something settle in her chest, something she had not realized was missing until now. Peace, belonging, home, not as a place, but as a person. "We still have to get to Carson City," Ryder said eventually, though he made no move to let her go. "We still have to see this through." "I know, and we will." Miranda pulled back enough to look at him properly. "But after that, we do not have to say goodbye. We can figure out what comes next together." "Together," Ryder repeated, like he was testing the word, finding it foreign and wonderful. "I like the sound of that." They sat together by the dying fire, planning and dreaming and slowly building a future out of the ruins of their pasts. It was not the future Miranda had imagined for herself. It was better because it was real, and it was chosen, and it was theirs. The final day of travel passed in a blur of hard riding and heightened awareness. They were close to Carson City now, close enough that they could not afford any more mistakes or delays. Ryder pushed them hard, taking every shortcut he knew, avoiding settlements and way stations where they might be recognized. By late afternoon, they could see Carson City spread out in the valley below, a proper town with buildings and streets and the blessed promise of civilization. Miranda felt a surge of relief so intense it was almost painful. They had made it. Against all odds, they had actually made it. "The federal building is on the main street," Ryder said as they paused on a ridge overlooking the town. "Marshal Thomas Webb keeps an office there. He is a hard man, but a fair one. He will listen to what you have to say." "What if he does not believe me? What if Morse has gotten to him too?" "Then we go to the territorial governor. And if that does not work, we go to the newspapers. We keep going until someone with power and integrity listens." Ryder reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "You are not alone in this anymore, Miranda. Whatever happens, we face it together." They rode into Carson City as the sun was setting. Two dusty travelers on tired horses, carrying evidence that could bring down one of Nevada's richest men. The federal building was exactly where Ryder said it would be, a solid brick structure that radiated authority. They tied their horses outside and climbed the steps, Miranda clutching her precious papers. Marshal Thomas Webb was a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Miranda's story with no expression, occasionally glancing at Ryder, who stood beside her with his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. When she finished and spread her evidence across his desk, the marshal studied the papers for a long time in silence. "This is damning evidence," he said finally. "If these ledgers are genuine, Clayton Morse is looking at federal charges for fraud, criminal negligence, and about a dozen labor violations." He looked up at Miranda with something like respect in his eyes. "You know he's going to come after you with everything he has. He will say you forged these documents. He will drag your name through the mud. He will make your life hell." "He already has," Miranda said steadily. "I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Those men deserve justice. My father deserves justice." "And my brother," Ryder added quietly. Webb nodded slowly. "I will open a formal investigation immediately. I will need you to stay in Carson City to give sworn testimony, Miss Barrett. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir, as long as it takes." "Good." Webb stood and offered his hand. "You did a brave thing coming forward with this. A lot of people would have kept their heads down and let it go. The territory needs more citizens like you." They left the marshal's office as the street lamps were being lit, stepping out into the cool evening air. Miranda felt like she could finally breathe properly for the first time in weeks. It was not over, not by a long shot. There would be investigations and trials and testimony. Morse would fight back with every weapon at his disposal. But the truth was out there now in the hands of someone who could do something about it. "We should find a hotel," Ryder said, "get you a proper room and a hot meal." "We should get us proper rooms," Miranda corrected. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together, not caring who saw. "Unless you were planning to abandon me now that we are here?" "Not a chance." Ryder smiled, that transformative expression that made him look younger, happier, more alive. "I told you. We are in this together now." They found a respectable hotel and took 2 rooms because even with everything that had happened, neither of them was quite ready to completely scandalize proper society. But they had dinner together in the hotel restaurant, talking and laughing like the future was something bright instead of frightening. And when Ryder walked her to her room, he kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I will be right next door if you need anything," he said, his hand lingering on her cheek. "I know, thank you, Ryder. For everything." "You do not have to thank me. You gave me something I did not think I would ever have again. Purpose, hope, someone to care about beyond myself." He kissed her once more, gentle and sweet. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start building our new lives." The investigation moved quickly once Marshal Webb took up the case. Within a week, federal agents had descended on McGill and seized the Consolidated Mining Company's records. The evidence Miranda had gathered, combined with testimony from miners who had been too frightened to speak up before, painted a damning picture of corporate malfeasance and criminal negligence. Clayton Morse was arrested in San Francisco as he tried to board a ship to China. The newspapers covered the story extensively, and Miranda found herself an unlikely heroine, the brave bookkeeper who had risked everything to expose corruption. The same papers that had run vicious gossip about her impropriety now praised her courage and integrity. She found the reversal both gratifying and deeply cynical. Ryder stayed with her through all of it, attending hearings, dealing with reporters, making sure she ate and slept, and did not let the stress consume her. They had fallen into an easy partnership, finishing each other's sentences, communicating with looks and small touches. The people of Carson City, who were more cosmopolitan than McGill residents, seemed to accept them as a couple without much comment. 3 months after they arrived in Carson City, Clayton Morse was convicted of multiple federal crimes and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. The Consolidated Mining Company was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to the families of the men who had died and the workers who had been cheated. Miranda received a commendation from the territorial governor and a job offer from a large accounting firm in Sacramento. She turned down the job offer. "Are you certain?" Ryder asked when she told him. They were sitting in a small park near their hotel, watching the autumn leaves drift down from the cottonwoods. "That is good money and a respectable position. You could build a real life there." I do not want a respectable position in Sacramento, Miranda said. I want a real life with you, wherever that takes us. Ryder was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I have been thinking about something. Before Daniel died, he was saving to buy land and start ranching. He left me everything he had, which was not much, but combined with what I have saved over the years, it is enough for a down payment on a small spread. There is land available north of here, up in the Ruby Valley. Good grazing, plenty of water, room to grow. Miranda's heart began to beat faster. Are you saying you want to stop drifting? Put down roots? I am saying I want to build something permanent, with you, if you will have me. Ryder turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. I know we have only known each other a few months. I know this is fast by any reasonable standard, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Miranda Barrett. I want to marry you, build a ranch with you, have a future with you. If you will take a chance on a reformed drifter with more determination than sense. Miranda laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes. Yes, of course, yes, I love you too, Ryder Vaughn. You took my honor and made it a shield when everyone else was using it as a weapon. You showed me what it means to be truly free. I would follow you anywhere, but I would much rather build a home with you. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, with Marshall Webb and his wife as witnesses. Miranda wore a dress of deep blue silk, the most beautiful thing she had ever owned, paid for with part of the reward money the territorial government had given her for exposing Morse's crimes. Ryder wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but devastatingly handsome. When he slipped the plain gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Miranda felt like her life was finally, truly beginning. They spent their brief honeymoon purchasing supplies for the ranch and making plans. Ryder had already put a deposit on 160 acres in Ruby Valley, land that came with a small cabin, a barn that needed repair, and a creek running through the property. It was not much, but it was theirs. They would build it into something together. The journey to Ruby Valley took a week, and when they finally arrived at their property, Miranda stood in the doorway of the little cabin and felt something fierce and possessive surge through her. This was home. Not because it was fancy or comfortable or impressive, but because it was hers and Ryder's, earned through courage and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to let injustice stand. What do you think? Ryder asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. I think it is perfect. Miranda leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. I think we are going to be very happy here. I think so too. The first year was hard work. They repaired the barn and the corral, built a chicken coop and a smokehouse, bought a dozen cattle and 2 more horses. Ryder proved to be a skilled rancher, and Miranda discovered she had a talent for managing the business side of their operation. She kept meticulous records of expenses and income, negotiated fair prices for their beef, and even started doing bookkeeping for some of their neighbors as a way to bring in extra money. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and getting more so. More importantly, they were happy. Miranda woke every morning next to a man who loved her for exactly who she was, no pretense or propriety required. She could wear her hair down, speak her mind, manage accounts, and ride horses, and do whatever she pleased without judgment. Ryder treated her as a full partner in their enterprise, asking her opinion on important decisions and respecting her judgment. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch of their cabin and watch the sun set over the mountains, planning their future. They wanted to expand the herd, build a bigger house, maybe take in some of the orphans from the mining camps and give them the chance at a better life that Daniel had never gotten. By the end of their first year in Ruby Valley, Miranda realized she was pregnant. She told Ryder one night after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, processing. Then a smile spread across his face, joy transforming his features. A baby? We are having a baby? Yes, in about 6 months, if I have calculated correctly. Ryder swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protest to be careful. We are having a baby, he repeated. wonder in his voice. "Miranda, this is the best news I have ever heard." Their son was born in late April of 1885, delivered by a midwife from the neighboring ranch, while Ryder paced anxiously in the yard. He was healthy and loud, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Daniel, after the brother who had never gotten to see Ryder find happiness, and Samuel, after the reverend who had given Miranda a chance to tell the truth. Holding her son for the first time, looking up at Ryder, who was gazing at both of them with naked love on his face, Miranda felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. This was what she had been fighting for, though she had not known it at the time. Not just justice or truth, but the freedom to build a life on her own terms with someone who valued her for who she was. 2 years later, they had a daughter, a fierce little thing with red gold hair and her mother's sharp intelligence. They named her Rose, after Miranda's mother. Danny adored his little sister, following her around and trying to protect her from dangers both real and imagined. The ranch prospered. They built a larger house with real glass windows and a proper kitchen. They expanded their herd to 50 head of cattle and started breeding horses on the side. Miranda's bookkeeping business grew until she was managing accounts for a dozen ranches and small businesses in the valley. Ryder served as deputy sheriff for a while, his fast draw and calm demeanor making him a natural for keeping the peace. They took in 2 boys from a mining camp, brothers who had been orphaned in a shaft collapse. Michael and Thomas were 13 and 11, old enough to be useful hands but young enough to need guidance and family. They thrived at the ranch, growing strong and healthy, learning ranching from Ryder and business from Miranda. Eventually, they would start their own spreads nearby, extending the family. Years passed, good years full of hard work and simple pleasures. Danny grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to study law, inspired by his mother's fight for justice. Rose became a skilled horsewoman who could rope a steer as well as any man. Michael and Thomas married local girls and started families of their own. Ryder's hair went silver and the lines around his eyes deepened, but he never lost the quiet strength that had first drawn Miranda to him. Miranda herself grew confident in ways she never had been in McGill, comfortable in her own skin and certain of her place in the world. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they rode up into the mountains above their ranch, just the 2 of them. Leaving the younger children with Michael and Thomas for the day, they found a meadow carpeted with wildflowers and spread a blanket, eating the lunch Miranda had packed and enjoying the vast silence of the high country. "Do you ever regret it?" Ryder asked, lying with his head in her lap while she ran her fingers through his hair. "Leaving everything behind, riding off with a stranger, building this life instead of going back east or finding somewhere civilized to settle?" "Not for a single moment," Miranda said honestly. "McGill wanted to control me by using my honor as a weapon. You showed me how to make it a shield instead. You taught me that true honor is about being honest with yourself, not meeting other people's expectations. Everything good in my life came from that lesson. Everything good in my life came from you having the courage to testify that day." Ryder reached up and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "You saved me, Miranda. I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something, to hope for a future. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Miranda corrected. She leaned down and kissed him, sweet and deep. 20 years of love and partnership, and shared dreams in that single kiss. And we are not done yet. We still have grandchildren to spoil and adventures to have and a whole lifetime ahead of us. "A whole lifetime," Ryder agreed. "I like the sound of that." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, down through the golden hills to the valley where their house stood with smoke rising from the chimney and their family waiting. Danny was home from law school in Sacramento, and he had brought a young woman he wanted them to meet. Rose was working with a new filly in the corral, her laughter floating on the evening air. Michael and Thomas's children were playing in the yard, their shouts and giggles a constant joyful noise. This was what she had fought for, Miranda thought, as she and Ryder rode through the gates of their ranch. Not just justice for her father and Ryder's brother, though that mattered. Not just exposing corruption, though that was important. She had fought for the freedom to choose her own path, to love who she wanted, to build a life that was authentic and real instead of prescribed by other people's expectations. They had used her honor against her, the good people of McGill who could not stand to see a woman step out of her assigned role. They had taken everything she valued about herself and twisted it into a weapon to hurt her, to silence her, to put her back in her place. But Ryder had shown her a different way. He had seen her honor not as something to be used or manipulated, but as something to be protected and strengthened. He had made her honor a shield, something that defended her right to live according to her own values instead of other people's rules. That was the real love story, she thought. Not just the romance between a former drifter and a brave bookkeeper, though that was part of it. The real love story was learning to love herself enough to refuse to be controlled and finding someone who loved her for exactly who she was. That evening, the whole family gathered around the big table in the ranch house for dinner. They ate and laughed and told stories, multiple generations connected by blood and choice and love. Danny talked about his studies and introduced his young lady, a bright-eyed school teacher who seemed charmed by the whole rowdy bunch of them. Rose announced she wanted to start breeding horses seriously, turning her passion into a business. Michael and Thomas shared news from their own ranches and their children's accomplishments. Through it all, Miranda and Ryder sat side by side, their hands clasped under the table, exchanging glances that spoke of shared history and private jokes, and enduring love. This was their legacy, Miranda thought, not just the ranch or the cattle or the land, but this family they had built from nothing, this community of people who valued honesty and courage and treating each other with respect. After dinner, after the younger children were in bed and the older ones had dispersed to their own pursuits, Miranda and Ryder sat on their porch and watched the stars come out over the Ruby Valley. They did not need to talk, comfortable in the silence after so many years together, but eventually Ryder said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For taking a chance on me, for seeing something worth keeping when most people just saw a saddle tramp with a gun and a grudge, for building this with me." He gestured at the ranch, the house, the whole life they had created. "I never thought I would have something like this, a home, a family, a reason to get up every morning beyond simple survival. You gave me all of that." "You gave me freedom," Miranda said simply. "You showed me it was possible to live by my own rules and still be a good person. You proved that honor does not have to mean obedience, that integrity does not require silence, that love does not demand surrender of self. Those were gifts beyond price, Ryder." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and built something beautiful from the ruins. The stars wheeled overhead, the cattle lowed softly in the distance, and somewhere in the house a baby cried and was soothed back to sleep. This was happiness, Miranda thought. Real, earned, chosen happiness. Not the pale imitation she had been offered in McGill, where happiness meant conforming and staying small and never making waves. This was the wild, free happiness of people who had fought for their right to exist on their own terms and won. She had been Miranda Barrett once, a respectable bookkeeper in a small Nevada mining town, trapped by expectations and propriety and the weight of other people's opinions. That woman had died the day a bullet shattered a church window, killed by the very people who claimed to care about her reputation. From those ashes had risen Miranda Vaughn, wife and mother and rancher and bookkeeper and so much more. A woman who understood that honor could be armor instead of chains, that love was something freely given between equals, that freedom was worth any cost. The years continued to pass in Ruby Valley. Danny became a respected attorney in Sacramento but came home often, eventually bringing his schoolteacher wife and their 3 children to live on a piece of land adjacent to the original ranch. Rose married a neighboring rancher and started the finest horse breeding operation in northern Nevada, fulfilling her childhood dream. Michael and Thomas's families thrived and expanded, their children growing up with the same values of hard work and integrities that Ryder and Miranda had instilled in them. Ryder and Miranda grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They faced hardships, as all ranchers did, winters that killed cattle and droughts that dried up creeks and market crashes that threatened their livelihood. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense, and they always found a way through. When they were both in their 70s, silver-haired and weathered but still strong, they took a trip back to McGill. The town had changed significantly since 1883. The Consolidated Mining Company was long gone, replaced by smaller operations with better safety records and fairer labor practices. Many of the people who had shunned Miranda were dead or moved away, but a few remained, and they remembered. Sheriff Hanson, elderly and retired, approached them on the street. He looked at Miranda with shame in his eyes. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I knew you were telling the truth, and I turned you over to Morse anyway. I have regretted it every day since." "You made your choice," Miranda said calmly. "We all have to live with our choices. You were right to leave. You did the right thing exposing Morse. A lot of lives were saved because of your courage." Hanson glanced at Ryder, then back to Miranda. "I heard you built a good life up in Ruby Valley. I am glad. You deserved better than what this town gave you." They did not stay long in McGill. There was nothing there for them anymore, just ghosts and old pain. But it was important to Miranda to see it one last time, to remember where she had come from and how far she had traveled. That night back in their hotel in Ely, she told Ryder, "I needed to see it with older eyes, to remember that those people who hurt me were not monsters. They were just afraid and small and too invested in the way things had always been. They could not imagine a woman telling the truth mattering more than keeping the peace. Does it help? Seeing them now? It helps me forgive them, I think. Not forget, but forgive. They took so much from me, but in the end they gave me something too. They gave me you." Miranda took his hand, her fingers still fitting perfectly with his after so many years. "If McGill had accepted my testimony, if they had stood with me instead of against me, I would have stayed there. I would have kept my small, safe life and never known what I was capable of. Never known what real love felt like." "So you are saying I should thank them for being terrible?" "I am saying that sometimes the worst things that happen to us open doors we did not know existed." She kissed him gently. "I would not change a single thing about our story, Ryder. Not one moment. It was all necessary to bring us here." They returned to Ruby Valley and the life they had built. Surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they continued to work the ranch as long as their bodies allowed, then transitioned into advisory roles, teaching the younger generation everything they had learned about ranching and business and life. On a clear autumn morning, 47 years after they first rode into Carson City with evidence that would bring down one of Nevada's most powerful men, Ryder Vaughn died peacefully in his sleep with Miranda's hand in his. He was 88 years old, and he had lived a good, full life, rich with love and purpose. Miranda grieved him deeply, but without regret. They had been given more time together than most couples dreamed of, and they had used every moment well. She lived for 5 more years, watching her family continue to grow, seeing Danny's grandchildren start college, attending Rose's 50th wedding anniversary, holding Michael and Thomas's great-great-grandchildren. When her own time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by 3 generations of Vaughns and the people they loved. Her last conscious thought was a memory of a hot August day in 1883, standing outside a church with her life in ruins, meeting the gray eyes of a stranger who offered her a choice. She had chosen freedom, she had chosen truth, she had chosen love, and it had made all the difference. The ranch in Ruby Valley continued for generations after Miranda and Ryder were gone, passed down through their children and grandchildren. The story of how it began, of the brave bookkeeper and the righteous cowboy who brought down a corrupt mine owner, became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, But the real legacy was not the land or the story. The real legacy was the lesson Miranda had learned and passed on to everyone who came after, that honor could be a shield instead of a weapon. That integrity meant being true to yourself instead of conforming to other people's expectations, and that real love meant seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway. They used her honor against her. Those small-minded people in McGill who could not stand to see a woman speak truth to power. They tried to make her goodness into a weapon to silence and control her. Ryder made her honor a shield instead, something that protected her right to live authentically and fight for what was right. And together, they built a love that lasted beyond death, a family that carried their values forward, and a legacy that proved courage and integrity would always matter more than conformity and fear. In the end, that was everything.